we're going to talk about the quietest NAS of the year. Okay, so let's face it, we all like NAS. You wouldn't be watching this video if you haven't searched for a NAS or if you're not considering buying a NAS. And one of the biggest considerations these days, with NAS being, available in desktop form and being used for multimedia in the home or in the office, and we're so close to these devices at all times, is noise. The last thing we want is to sit near a NAS that's going to click and whir and spin and the fans go mental and drive us crazy. Now, during the course of this video, I'm going to talk about the top 5 NAS this year that are the quietest, or in some cases referred to as silent. Now, I do the little italics because it is based on the media that you install inside. Even the quietest NAS in the world, if you fill it with industrial class hard drives, I'm looking at you, HGST Destar NAS. There are some drives out there that make more noise than others, and the problem is, doesn't matter how quiet the NAS claims to be, the hard drive media or the SSD media sometimes will make all the difference. So do bear that in mind as a quick disclaimer to make sure that a silent NAS can only reach the limitations of the hard drive or SSD media you put inside, because sometimes they will make more noise than the NAS. You can't avoid it. So, at the bottom of the screen, I'm sure it's already said which of the NAS I'm going to talk about today, but what order? It's pretty obvious, really. But first and foremost, the quietest NAS in 5th place is going to be the DS119J. It's not quite released yet, but right now, pound for pound, price for price, and based on the noise the 115J made, this is going to be a real quiet unit for release this year. It's got a dual-core ARM CPU inside. It's got 256 megabits of RAM, which is a bit depressing, to be perfectly honest, megabytes even. It's got a couple of USB there. I think it's got 1 or 2 there on the back. And it's got a tiny rear fan. Now, it doesn't have hot swapping enabled. And also, the fan inside is so small, and the chassis being plastic, that this is really not going to generate that much noise. Also, because it's not going to be in a RAID array with multiple drives, and the amount of access that's going to be going on with this, the drive isn't going to have to work too hard, and therefore noise is going to be limited by the likes of vibration as well. Now, the CPU, although it's a bit modest, it has to be said, this is not designed for high-end tasks anyway. So if you're already looking at the DS119J, then you know this isn't exactly going to be an earth-shattering NAS. So the amount of heat being generated from that CPU is going to be moderately low, because most of the time it won't even be able to perform actions that would push it to the very brink. I'm talking about Plex, talking about virtualization, talking about large-scale backup on multiple servers like Active Backup Sync. But nevertheless, particularly in terms of price as well, that's what got this the number 5 spot for quietest NAS of the year, the DS119J, being released in just a few months. Next, in the next place, another Synology. It's another old Synology though this time, the DS416 Slim, that tiny little 4-bay. We've talked about it on the channel a few times, and it's about the size of this mug, this little kiddie mug down here. It is a tiny little 4-bay NAS. It's got a rear-mounted fan, but it's a tiny fan as well, and the media you put inside has to be 2.5 inch in scale. So that means either 2.5 inch kind of laptop form factor drives, or of course SSD. Now, full disclosure, you could put SSDs inside this to make it really, really quiet, but it's only got dual LAN on the back of it, and you won't get the full speeds of SSD. Even if you link aggregate, you're only going to get speeds of around 200 to 220 megabits per second. Something that, link aggregate a couple of 1 GBE still doesn't justify the cost of SSDs inside this device. But nevertheless, it is a RAID-enabled 4-bay that does not make a lot of noise. It will support things like surveillance. It will support a number of the Synology proprietary first-person apps like chat, calendar, drive, moments, and more. Although, once again, like the 119J, it's not earth-shatteringly powerful. And it's earned its place on this list because I don't know of any other 4-bay NASes that can be as quiet as this bad boy. Moving on to the 3rd place slot, we can switch over to the guys at QNAP. And that is the HS251 Plus. Now, this device is about 1.5 years old, maybe even 1 year and 2/3. And this is known as the original silent NAS. The HS251 Plus. It's got a quad-core Intel-based CPU inside, and between 2 and 8 gig of DDR3 memory. What makes it silent? Well, a couple of bits. One, it is incredibly narrow form factor device, chassis design, very low and great for multimedia. It comes with a remote control. It's got HDMI port there for the rear, as well as audio in and out. I believe it even has a card reader alongside the USB port. So if you're looking for a quiet NAS to watch all your multimedia locally over HDMI, this is definitely the device for you to consider, because the HDMI output will assist you in things like Kodi, which is officially unsupported, but it's up to you if you want to play with that. But you can install a Plex Media server on this via HDMI output. That means you can watch media directly on your TV as well as stream over the network and the internet at the same time, and use a remote control to watch all of your media at the same time. You can back up multiple devices. It can even run one VM, but pretty poorly. And it can be utilised for all of the backups that you need, surveillance and more. It supports up to 20 or maybe even 30 cameras, I believe. What's the downside? Well, the reason this is a silent NAS is it has no rear fan. This device doesn't have the fan that will be spinning around at all, and therefore the only noise really being generated is from the hard drives you install. So as long as you go for standard NAS class hard drives about 3 or 4 TB in size, or SSD, this thing really will be silent. But the big negative, with no fan, that's a huge amount of heat being generated internally. Heat on the media and heat on the CPU and memory. They've tried to get around this with this enormous metal panel on the top to dissipate heat across the device, but it does get alarmingly hot. And with heat means that the CPU and internal hardware can lose performance values as well, because you know, if you've ever used a PC that's on for too long, you'll know that the hotter it gets and the harder it works, the slower it can get. So there's definitely something to bear in mind, and definitely what made it not get the top spot on this list despite the silent badge. In second to last list, and wow, sore throat. In second to last place is a Synology. It is the DS619 Slim. It is the follow-up to the other Slim unit we talked about earlier on. But what makes this device particularly interesting is it's managed to be compact, be only a fraction bigger than its predecessor at 416 Slim, but it's a 6-bay NAS. It's got the dual LAN and it's got hot swapping enabled, and it's got a tiny little rear fan on the back. But what's really impressive is, despite it following in the footsteps scale-wise and design-wise as the other slimmed compact model, this arrives with some insane internal hardware. The CPU and memory inside this rivals that of the 918. It's got a quad-core J series Intel CPU, and that is the J3455, a quad-core 1.5 GHz CPU that can be bursted up to 2.3. It also arrives with between 2 and 8 gig of memory. So again, great internal specs. 6 bays on the outside there, all taking either 2.5-inch hard drive media or SSD, and it's definitely, it gives you everything. It gives you internal power, it gives you quietness, it gives you a low RPM fan there on the rear, and great RAID potential. So why isn't it in first place? Well, even though it's got 6 bays, and even though it's got that great CPU and memory inside, and even though it can install up to 6 SSDs inside, which means even if you only get 1 TB SSDs, you can really mount up that storage in a RAID, it still only has 2 LAN ports. It doesn't have 10 GBE or a PCIe slot, which means if you fully populate this tiny little 6-bay with SSDs, you're not going to get the throughput that you deserve, because those 2 LANs, once again, even if you link aggregate them, you're only going to get about 220 megabits per second on that network. And with SSDs, an SSD on its own can vastly exceed that in terms of read and write. So you'll be kind of losing out on the max speed once you've RAIDed a bunch of those SSDs together, maybe in a RAID 0. So again, that's the reason it loses the top spot. Still a great NAS, and it will cost more than the 416 Slim, but nevertheless, it just missed out on the top spot. And to who? The QNAP HS453DX. This is silence plus power plus throughput. Everything that was the complaint of all the other devices we talked about, this remedies them. Okay. 1. It's a 2 hard drive bay NAS, to be technical. It's got 2 bays for 3.5-inch hard drives or SSD as you see fit, but it also lets you install 2 M2 SSDs as well. So you've got SSD storage and hard drive storage. So you can leverage hard drive space for long-term storage and use SSDs insanely fast, pull them together, use them for caching or live editing. Now, it doesn't arrive with a remote control, but it does arrive with a brand new chassis, white around the outside, a lovely copper sort of rose gold lid, and on the rear we've got HDMI, we've got HDMI 2.0 in fact, so 60 frames per second 4K output via HDMI on the rear. so it supports things like Plex and stuff like that. It's got a brand new Intel CPU inside. I think the J1408 or 4108, I can't remember, but it's still the most efficient Intel Celeron right now for NAS. But it also has 10 GBE connectivity, which is a big deal, because it doesn't have the fan, just like the HS, so it's got active cooling, or not active, but passive cooling on the top with the metal panel to dissipate heat. And it looks very different, even won a design award, this thing. But it's got the space inside for those SSDs, it's a quiet NAS, and it's got 10 GBE, so you don't lose the speed of those SSDs once you RAID them. So whether you want to use the SSDs to live edit over 10 GBE, but still use a 4K output and connect a monitor to see your work on a 4K screen, and then use the hard drives for general storage and move your completed projects over and then distribute those on your network and internet, this has got it. And the device itself, I haven't got it here in front of me, but it is about this big. If you look top down, it's only about that tall. It's a great bloody device, and it is definitely my pick for quietest NAS of 2018. So those are the top 5. Find one that's in your budget. They do get progressively more expensive as you go down the list. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Cheerio.